Okay, good evening, everyone. Those of you who are able to join virtually and our guest in person as well. My name is Jonathan Ingram. I'm with Ref Telus, local government consulting firm. And today we are going to be sharing some information regarding a process that the city of South Pasadena has engaged in regarding the police department's full staffing and operations analysis process, which we have been hired to complete. The goal of this conversation is really to give folks an overview of the process and also provide some context and some of the initial findings as well as where we're at in the project, just to give folks a general update. But more importantly, to give folks an opportunity to provide some feedback from a community's perspective in terms of, what are the most important characteristics from a public safety perspective that we ought to take into account. This is the third public engagement session that we have completed. And our goal here is really to just kind of continue the process that we've begun kind of some time ago. So we've developed a PowerPoint to share with you all as a starting point, which we'll work through. I will say, just from a logistics perspective, I know many of you are online, kind of paying attention via the Zoom chat. We have someone from the city monitoring the chat. If you want to raise your hand through the Zoom feature and ask a question as we're moving forward, you're welcome to do that. But we'll also be asking questions here sort of at the end of the PowerPoint and providing an opportunity for really some open dialogue as well. Okay. Any questions before I get started?
I see no hands raised on Zoom.
Thank you. Open the PowerPoint here. This doesn't seem to be working. I'm going to advance the slide. Thank you. So generally what I want to cover today, and I kind of hit on this, is just some introductions. I also have a colleague with me, Cassandra Deck-Brown, who I'll ask to introduce herself here in a moment. But again, give you that overview, give you of the project, give you a status update, and work through key themes, and give you just an opportunity to answer some very specific questions that we can take into account as we wrap up our analysis and ultimately present our recommendations to the city. So in terms of just who we are, again, my name is Jonathan Ingram. I'm with Ref Telus. We're a local government utility consulting firm. I do a lot of work in the local government space, and I lead our public safety practice. And in that role, I've done over 75 of these kinds of studies across the country, everything from small communities where the police chief jumps off a tractor to respond to a call to communities as large as 500,000-600,000 people. Also with me is my colleague, Cassandra Deck-Brown, and I'll ask her to chime in and share a little bit about her background as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. It looks like I don't have access to open up the video. The host has that control. But good evening, everyone. I am Cassandra Deck-Brown. I am a retired police chief from the city of Raleigh after 8 years of serving there. I retired with 34 years in law enforcement. I have had the opportunity to be on both sides of the consulting table, to be the police chief and a commander in an organization seeking consulting information and opportunities to strengthen the department and to make it more efficient. And I'm a part of this team. So I now sit on the other side of the table, where I have the opportunity to offer, with my colleague Jonathan and so many others, opportunities to advance departments in this 21st century as well. So thank you all for being here. Glad to be a part of this experience.
Thank you, Cassandra. So just before we get started, we have ground rules set up, but again, generally we won't go over this too much. There aren't too many folks here physically present. But again, as we kind of engage in this process, if you have questions, we're happy to engage. The goal here is to hear your thoughts and perspectives, and to be respectful through that process, and to make sure that those perspectives get reflected in our report. So we encourage any discussions or questions as we move forward. So generally, in terms of project overview and status update, just quickly in terms of what the big questions that we were asked to solve. So generally speaking, what I want to just outline is the city's RFP process. So ultimately, the city of South Pasadena chose in about September of 2022 to engage in this process of identifying a local government consulting firm to complete what's called a staffing and organizational assessment of the department. This is really an objective look to understand what is working well, what are the challenges, and what are the issues that ultimately need to be addressed, both in terms of a service delivery perspective, but also from a community engagement, community policing perspective. There were 5 firms that responded to the RFP and were interviewed, and two were selected for interviews, and ultimately Ref Tellis was selected. Again, we were asked to answer some fundamental questions. You know, the big overarching question is to do almost a doctor's checkup of the department. You know, what are we doing well, and what are the challenges, and what do we need to do to improve service to the community? The big question really is, are we staffed and structured appropriately? Are we properly trained? Do we have the skills, both in term and resources and equipment, to be able to perform at the level of service the community expects? Are there big gaps? And if so, how do we fill those gaps? What are the best practices, both in terms of kind of traditional policing as well as cutting edge approaches in terms of alternative policing models and those sorts of things? And then, of course, the question of whether or not the services that are provided are fair and equitable to all. This is often a very challenging question to answer, and our focus is really on understanding from a best practice perspective, how do we create an approach? How do we build upon the strengths of the department, which is already doing a lot of really good things in the space of community engagement? But how do we really strengthen community engagement, communications, transparency in the department to really build and enhance a culture of trust? The project included really a number of different activities. The first was really initial fact finding, interviews with community focus groups and stakeholders, interviews with department personnel, as well as an extensive data request process. We've also conducted public engagement sessions to provide some opportunity for folks to provide feedback. We've had one session. This is the second of those sessions. We'll also be ultimately presenting findings at a city council meeting to provide additional opportunities for feedback down the road. We have moved really heavily into the analytical and research phase of the process and are well underway. One of the requests that the city asked is that we try to include another public engagement session, which is this session, to create a little bit more opportunity for folks who have an interest to participate. So once we've wrapped this process, this sort of the public engagement process, we will then finalize our draft report and project report and ultimately present it to council here in late fall. So I just want to touch on just a few general themes to date in our conversations and our analysis and research thus far. Now, one really important thing to note is this is a very diverse community with very high service level expectations. We do this work all around the country, and that service level expectation, the expectation for outstanding service, personal service in some respects, is really a driving force and a culture, and is reflected culturally in the department. Department personnel resources have remained mostly unchanged over the past many years. Now, this has created some constraints in delivering and meeting that high level of service, and really some tension that this process is really designed to help try to solve. So there's also some very specific and unique challenges to the community in terms of the commuter population from the highway and the train. That can create some influence in terms of crime patterns, in terms of quality of life issues that maybe aren't really reflected by just looking at the size of the community alone. So there are some really specific challenges that the department has to deal with in that space. There's also a very broad focus, I think, as many of you in the community know, on equity and justice and policing. The department has really focused on making sure that this process, the city has really focused on making sure that this process reflects a thorough review of that of those criteria, where it's possible to draw firm conclusions and ultimately make good, strong recommendations for how that relationship with the community, how that focus can be enhanced and prioritized in the department. There are a number of really important strengths. One of the things that we try to focus on is to honor that departments and organizations come to where they are often for good reason in response to very specific community challenges. there's a real desire and a real commitment in the department to provide very high quality service. There's a really strong culture in that space, a strong understanding that that's what this community expects. And there's a commitment from officers. You know, we had a chance to speak with a lot of the department on providing that level of service. There's also a really strong family atmosphere, which is for staff, which is a very good thing. It's a really important recruitment and retention tool, but also reflects a strong culture, and that's not always the case. I'll say we've been in departments where there've been some really troubled cultures, and that's not the case in this department. There's also some real effort to pilot best practices such as co-response models for mental health incidents. So one of the challenges is, as I mentioned, the department is relatively small and has not grown in capacity as the complexity of the police environment and workload has increased. But there is still a lot of effort to try to use the limited resources that are available to advance alternative forms of policing and really advance a model that is informed by best practices in the space relating to co-occurring mental health and substance abuse issues, and the best way to respond and divert those folks away from the criminal justice system and into treatment and care. There are also a number of challenges with staffing vacancies. Right now, the minimum staffing requirements and some of the challenges in the department are making it difficult to fill positions. The department has had some experience of losing staff to higher paid departments. There are consistent levels of vacancies that are making it difficult to staff those minimum staffing requirements. There's also a lot more of focus on the proactive policing and engagement that requires a time commitment. One of the interesting things that I'll also note, we've helped a couple of departments develop and implement mental health core response models, and there's a belief that that can generate some cost savings, or some value, and it absolutely can. But one of the things that's sort of unspoken is that it also drives an increase in the amount of time required to spend on a call. It can transition a call from a 40-minute response to a 90-minute response or a 4-hour response very quickly. That creates a demand on resources that has to be filled, right? There's also one of the important points is there are ever increasing administrative reporting and compliance requirements in policing. There's an administrative burden in policing that did not exist even 10 years ago, with body worn cameras, with different technologies designed to elevate the transparency in policing. That creates an administrative burden that needs to be staffed as well. There's also some challenge with managing some of the property crime investigation and case clearance workload on the investigative side. But property crime investigations, these are typically the spaces where many folks are going to interact with law enforcement, and something as petty theft and even more serious thefts and crimes, and they have a really direct impact on quality of life. Based on some of the workload and the cases that are there, there's some challenge in really dedicating consistent resources to those, and that's impacted case clearance. And again, I've mentioned the commuter population and traffic volume. That was a high concern expressed in a lot of the stakeholder and community interviews, as well as the survey. One of the things that I didn't highlight is that we issued both an employee survey as well and a community survey to try to understand perspectives on, what are the public safety priorities in the community, and the traffic volume and traffic patterns and traffic risk were very highly cited in that process as well. And I think there's also some concern that was really expressed, both in terms of the department, in terms of how managing some of the challenges associated with the unhoused, and the quality of life issues for folks who live in the city of South Pasadena, but also creating services that serve and focus on that population as well. So in terms of key opportunities that we see, there are some clear opportunities to really right size the staff and structure of the department to align it with community expectations and workload demand. We want to create a lot of increased focus on proactive community engagement. So what has to happen from the community's perspective, from the department's perspective, and from a best practice perspective, to really build trust in the community and strengthen that relationship. Create some additional focus on that property crimes investigations. Really cultivate diversity at all levels of the organization. So one of the strengths of the department is it's a relatively diverse department compared to a lot of departments, but there's also an opportunity to really create diversity in the promotion process and really emphasize and focus on that. There's also a clear need to really focus on training and professional development and formalization of that process. Right now, really the only time that's available is to focus on that's uh, uh, s- those things that are required by post, and then ancillary training that we can get in when we can. We need to create capacity to really do some best practice training. The department is eager for it, and it also has a compounding advantage and benefit to not only enhancing and making sure the department is policing from a cutting edge perspective, but that folks in the department have access to things that really serve to expand their professional development. And then, of course, that trust component of the community and really building on the work the department has already done and is doing now, but really enhancing that to strengthen its relationship with the community. So those are just kind of high level, an overview of the process, just to give folks really a quick update at the thumbnail level. As I mentioned, we're working to ultimately wrap up our analysis and recommendations with the goal to have them wrapped here in November and present sometime late November, early December. So we're kind of coming toward the end of the process, at least in terms of developing recommendations. So at this, I'll pause and see if there are any questions at this point before I ask a couple of maybe open-ended questions to the community.
We have no hands raised on Zoom.
So in terms of just broad questions that I'd like to ask, so we have the questions on the slides and you'll be able to kind of read them. So I'm just going to move through a slide at a time and ask a question, and then I'll kind of quiet down and see if folks have any feedback that they'd like to share. So the first question. So when you think about the concept of sense of safety, what do you all believe as residents that the department should most focus on to improve your sense of safety in South Pasadena?
We have no hands raised on Zoom.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go through the questions, and folks can just respond at the end. A little tough to do in a hybrid meeting, I understand, but all right. So the next question. So community policing, I want to give a little context and kind of explain what community policing is. I had an old friend of mine who he was a police officer. He came up in the New York City Police Department, spent 25 years there, and he retired, became a police chief in another community. And he said that when they first started talking about what community policing was, he said, well, and someone explained to him that it's about building relationships, that it's about getting out of your car, that it's about strengthening relationships and trust with the community so that when an incident does occur, that incident can be dealt with in a collaborative way. And he always scratched his head and said, that just sounds like policing to me, right? So, when you think about how you want to interact with your police department, how you want your police department to interact with you, what does that look like? What does community policing look like in building those relationships? And are there barriers to that process or to that goal that we need to be aware of? The question of trust. This is a big area of focus, and one of the things that came up as part of our community engagement process and the survey process was really a desire to build some intentional practice around strengthening the trust and relationship. So how can the department provide greater transparency and accountability, and what would build trust? That's another key question. Okay, go ahead.
We do have a hand raised on Zoom. Let me promote Ms. Ella Hashagan.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ella Hushagen. And I appreciate that you guys are having another meeting. I was able to participate in the last one. And so I apologize if some of the comments that I make tonight are repetitive, but I do think they bear repeating. One thing that Care First South Pasadena has been asking for quite a lot is just a a lot more transparency from the department in terms of data. Rather than groups like ours having to go and file public records requests to get reports and then, try to figure out what the reports mean and sort of be, in conflict with the department about, well, no, that doesn't mean that, and that's not right. It's like, rather than do that, we'd really prefer for the department to just make the data available and clear for the community to see. So some cities do like a data dashboard.
Sure.
And I think that's something that would be really beneficial, like in terms of, where police activity is most frequent, like what businesses, what areas, and what arrests are being made under what, criminal codes, and then just racial and ethnic disparities, because currently it's very difficult to tell from the city's reports. They at least in the past, historically, they coded every Hispanic and non-Hispanic white as white. So that sort of hides the actual number. And so, things like that. I just think that they could go a long way toward building trust by just being more upfront. And I know that now, stop data is also required to be collected. So that should also be included on the dashboard.
Okay. Thank you for that. We'll put a check mark next to your original comment as well. That's much appreciated. Okay. The other question that I'd like to ask is just to get a sense from folks, if you've had any personal interactions with the South Pasadena Police Department, and if so, how would you describe that interaction? So I want to get a sense of, what that kind of what if you're willing to share what that experience was like, positive or negative.
We have no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay. And then just open up the floor. I think at this point, maybe we will, rather than kind of work through questions, maybe just open up, kind of unshare the PowerPoint. Folks are happy to turn on their cameras if you like, if you have anything you'd like to share or discuss, or you'd like to learn from us as we work through the process.
We have no hands raised on Zoom for this item.
Okay. One of the things with facilitating kind of public conversations is there has to be some comfort sitting in awkward silence until someone speaks up. So I'm gonna do that for a couple minutes. Go ahead.
We do have a hand raised. Let me promote Mr. Anthony Lai. Please proceed, sir.
Please proceed.
Hi.
Thank you.
Yes, hi, Anthony Lai. I'm sorry I missed the last question. I was had some food in my mouth, but
No, sir.
I just wanted to say that at least the interactions that I've had with South Pasadena PD have been exceptional. They were courteous, respectful. They were willing to listen to what concerns I had. Specifically, this was in regards to an incident in which some packages were taken off of my patio. I never got the sense that we were a burden or difficult, and in this environment in which we are sort of being really critical about law enforcement and the way that law enforcement, it's worthwhile to sort of take a step back and understand that these men and women are undertaking a lot of risk onto themselves to provide service to the community, and that it's great. It's appreciated.
Okay. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that comment.
We have Ms. Hashagan, who has raised her hand again.
Okay, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. Thanks so much. Just jumping back on to say that, you know, again, I was at the last meeting, so I'm a bit familiar with the comments from the community that were made at that meeting. And I think you know, in the PowerPoint presentation that you gave
Mhm.
at the outset, it was, you know, there was a sort of a summary of points received from the community, but nothing was mentioned about racial disparities in arrests or any community concerns about the size of the police budget or anything about the experiences of some community members, particularly Black Lives Matter South Pasadena activists who had negative experiences with the police department and spoke. You know, one of the plaintiffs in a lawsuit against the city spoke about her experience at the last meeting. And you know, I know it's like it can be very traumatizing for someone who's gone through something like that to keep having to talk about it again and again. So, you know, I'm not surprised that they are not here talking about it again tonight, but you know, that they did come to the last meeting and share their experiences and what they hope to see out of this assessment.
Sure.
And I don't see that necessarily reflected in the current, at least in this PowerPoint that you gave tonight. So,
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. So just kind of some context. So each of those comments was recorded and it will ultimately be reflected in the report. The PowerPoint and the public engagement sort of format is a PowerPoint that it's the same PowerPoint we used last time. So it hasn't been revised to reflect those comments, and that's intentional. Really, we're posing these questions to the group that's participating today. The report itself will provide a more detailed summary of the overall stakeholder engagement, including the survey.
okay. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
We have no additional hands raised on Zoom.
Well, with that, I will kind of pause. I'm certainly. Oh, one more question.
My apologies. We do have a hand now raised. An O. Ferguson.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. You know, I was connecting mobily within my mobile. There was I guess I just kind of echo some of the previous comments. At what point does this begin to better kind of like reflect some of the concerns that have been outlined? I mean, one of the things that I didn't really see in this assessment had to deal with like I'm not, did we come readiness and the purchase of these Teslas and how that doesn't really do anything to benefit the community?
So as I mentioned, the draft report, the project report that we'll be providing, that really details the overall assessment and our professional opinion regarding the things that and the specific recommendations that deserve focus. I think you know, whether we would opine as to whether the purchase of the electric vehicles was a good idea or a bad idea. Typically, that's not something we're going to speak to. Ultimately, what we would speak to is that there's a need to create a funding plan and a replacement schedule for a patrol fleet. There are lots of ways to do that, advantages and disadvantages with each of those. And our focus is really in making sure that there's a consistent process to make sure that the department is equipped in a way that provides the equipment necessary to deliver the services the community expects. So that's just from specifically to that comment. But I think, you know, the broader question around sort of how all of this gets reflected. So I'll kind of give you a little bit of preview. So we have a number of sections in our report, which is close to being ready to be kind of reviewed by the city. It'll be another month or so. But basically a complete breakdown of the community survey, a summary of the key themes, as well as the survey results and the specifics that were included in a way that protects folks' identities, right? We want to be very careful not to create a space where folks could infer who said what, right? So there's a lot of attention in that space. There's also a summary of the community themes. The summary of the themes that we heard during this conversation are ultimately used to inform many of our recommendations on community engagement, transparency, accountability, and trust, right? So that's the context of how what we're hearing is ultimately getting reflected in the work, right? So hopefully that helps answer the question a little bit.
We have no additional hands raised on Zoom.
Okay. Okay. Well, I appreciate the questions that we've had today. Any kind of one last final opportunity for additional questions? All right. With that, I appreciate your time this evening. I know a Monday night is it's sometimes difficult to participate in a public meeting. It's really appreciated. I will say our contact information is available. Maybe we can maybe share the last slide. If folks have questions, you're welcome to email us. My contact information, as well as Cassandra Deck Brown's contact information or email address, is on the PowerPoint here. So with that, I'll say thanks again, and you all have a great evening.